Howard Yu, Lego Professor of Management and Innovation at the IMD Business School in Switzerland. So, Professor, I wanted to talk to you about some of these executive orders. TikTok has gotten a lot of discussion, but I'm quite interested in the impact on Tencent with this executive order on WeChat. It affects not only WeChat's operations in the United States and transfer of payments and such, but also could have a very big effect on American companies in China. So let's talk for a moment about that. Is this going to be a kind of complicated web that it's hard to separate?
Absolutely, because if you think about WeChat, it's really a monster app in all sense. It's the Amazon, it's the the payment system, all the Western type of services all roll into one. So in a way that if you live in China, it's almost impossible to live without WeChat. It's almost like living without the iPhone in the Western world. So just to ban WeChat outright, that would hurt Apple in a very major way. A Huawei phone without Google in China, you can still use a lot of Chinese equivalent functionalities. But an iPhone in China without WeChat is almost becoming useless. So that would hurt the handset manufacturer right away. But then more importantly, if you're looking in China, all these Western brands, whether it's Walmart or Starbucks or Uniqlo, for instance, they're all using WeChat to communicate with the end consumer using the functionality called mini program. So banning WeChat would have this huge implication in terms of all these American firms having a major operation in China as the second largest economy.
How justified do you feel the US concerns about TikTok and WeChat are? And I'd just couch it in this language. If the Chinese government wants the data on those two apps, it's going to get it, isn't it?
Yeah, my major discomfort around this is all of these are issued through executive orders. There is really no clear debate on the policy itself, and there is no alternative mechanism for appeal. And in many ways, it's likely to result in bad policy making. We already see how the implication in terms of banning TikTok is pushing the company to negotiate with, Twitter as well as Microsoft right now. And all these uncertainty are bad for businesses. Businesses only thrive on stability and predictability. All of these just make Silicon Valley included are very nervous going forward and is likely to pull back of long-term investment over the long run.
The U.S. holds itself to a high standard, and it's very tempting to say, well, China doesn't allow any American companies to operate on the Internet in China, so fair enough. But the difficulty here is that I use the word description of web because this is so intertwined now that take, for instance, the sanctions on the Chinese officials in China and Hong Kong. Now all the banks in Hong Kong, they are at loggerheads because on the one hand, they might break the U.S. law. On the other hand, they might break the national security law if they do or don't do business with these Chinese officials. So it's really, really complex.
Absolutely. In a way, if you think about all of these executive orders, in a sense that is a very blunt force in trying to decouple the two biggest economies in the world. As I'm working with executives around the world at IMD, we are focusing so much now in terms of mitigation effort, not so much around investment. And quite frankly, if U.S. continue to pursue this path, any companies operating in the U.S. could no longer assume whatever product they're building can be selling across China. So if you think about the valuation of company, right, the stock price, which would take a major hit, the entire playbook of Silicon Valley, building an app, building world-class functionality, and rolling out the world may potentially coming to an end. Yes, Facebook is not operating in China. Yes, Google is not, but IBM and Microsoft are. And there are hosts of IT companies are operating and selling big in China as well. So huge implication on company valuation and U.S. competitive advantage going forward.
Does the World Trade Organization have much of a role to play here, or is it no longer really able to function in this kind of environment?
I mean, if you think back about 5, 7 years ago, if there are major trade tension across nation, of course WTO is going to step in and playing the role of a mediator, right? But today, because of the delegitimization of the organization and the continuing erosion of its authority, basically WTO play very little role in trying to mediate across nations. Even the trade dispute between Japan and South Korea, WTO tried to step in, but it still doesn't help. In terms of Uniqlo are forced to close down a store in South Korea as well. So I think it is a great loss to the global economy. It's a great loss to this whole idea of global collaboration and trade and commerce as well. So unless we have a new type of organization stepping in, I really don't see, sadly, a reversal trend.
Let's get briefly to TikTok again. The president, as the regulator, I suppose, made it impossible to do business in the United States. Is there conflict of interest for the president then to say he wants to get a commission for it?
I mean, that
Any
is
deal?
fairly unusual, right? For the business administration, for the administration, particularly the president, who said because we introduced this deal and we should take a cut, the Treasury should take substantial amount of cut during this deal. Fundamentally, this is an executive order banning a company, a foreign company, in the rhetoric that because of the Chinese government might use the American data and we're going to ban it. As a result, they are demanding a cut in the deal. That is highly unusual, and I'm not quite sure whether it is constitutional at all. So quite frankly, this is why TikTok is now filing a lawsuit against the administration in California in trying to claim this banning is in fact unconstitutional. It stopped consumer from making choices. So that would be a really interesting precedent going forward.
Just briefly, in the end, does TikTok go to Microsoft or Twitter?
Well, if you think about the potential valuation of TikTok, definitely Twitter is not able to buy it outright, and the candidates should usually go to Microsoft. But Twitter would represent a really interesting candidate going forward at the same time. So only time will tell.
Absolutely. All right, Professor, thank you so much. Howard Yu, Lego Professor of Management and Innovation at